Started. Hey, Kermit just asked, did I mention yesterday that novice designers tend to overuse symmetry? Why do I think that is? My personal feeling about that is that I think that we naturally gravitate towards symmetry, and especially when we're new to design, because we like things in an orderly fashion, and symmetry really gives us that. So a lot of times new designers will create centered text blocks rather than a left-aligned, left-justified text. And that's actually really bad on readability for large blocks of text, but it has a nice symmetrical feel to it when you have that text spaced evenly across both sides of a screen. Putting things in the center, that's not, like I said, it's not bad, but it's just, I think because it comes naturally to us, a sense of symmetry, then people will do that because they don't know what the other options are, what might be perceived as good design or well received by our human psychology, that sort of thing. So those are my thoughts about that. Thanks, that's a good question. All right, today is our last class for the introductory class, and it's been fun presenting this information to you. We've had, I think, a whirlwind of information given to you. I know that we jammed a ton into this class, and today is probably going to feel very much like that as well. We're just opening Pandora's box to this plethora of information for you to whet your appetite, perhaps, for future design work, or give you an added boost of skills that you'll be able to use in other areas of your life as well, hopefully. I hope that you've become more observant about the designs and the interactions that you have with digital technology because of this class. I'd love to hear any thoughts you have about that in the chat as well before we part ways today. Anything about what you've seen or what you've experienced, or in Slack, you could send me a message there as well. But what has this class done for opening your eyes to design and how design works, and what designers do and how interfaces work? All of that, I'd really love to hear your feedback there. So for tonight's class, we are going to be talking about high fidelity design, moving into that portion of our design cycle. And then we'll sort of do a wrap up. And I'm going to give you another assignment for tonight, and it's going to be something that you can do tonight, but then also expand probably past this time if you're interested in either pursuing the full-time UX course here at Lambda, or pursuing a UX design career without that. It might be useful in that regard as well. All right, so without further ado, let's jump in. The product design cycle. We've gone through this every time we've met, sort of talk about the discovery, where we're learning about our users, trying to understand them, build empathy for them, see what problems they have and what jobs they need done. And then we take it to this definition phase where we put some structure around those concepts, those ideas that we've gained from the discovery, understanding users, what are their needs by writing user stories, job stories, creating user journey maps. All of these things define the user experience to help us then create something in the ideation phase. And the ideation phase, as we talked about, is that expansive experience of coming up with multiple ideas, not letting our inhibitions get thrown out the window so that we can just expand our vision. And then after we've had that chance to expand our ideas, then we bring it back into a prototyping phase where we put more borders around what we're doing and give that shape using wireframes. And InVision, for example, is what we use to create click-through prototypes to try to get our understanding of a representation of what our thinking was in the ideation phase. We do that rapidly through sketching or through wireframes. Today we're talking about the development process, and as I mentioned in the first class, when I refer to development, I'm referring both to the high fidelity design, where we're taking those prototyped ideas and fleshing them out to a place where then the technical team, or the development team as they're sometimes called, can then create the final product for us to use. Then we move into the testing phase for user acceptance testing or checking our work. But like I said before, the prototyping, development, and testing all sort of form this tight loop that's happening frequently as we can. And so they're not really discrete parts of the cycle, except as we want to put names around them to be able to talk about them. So tonight, to introduce the idea of high fidelity design, I want to talk a little bit about design systems, because a design system consists of a visual design language that is broad enough to accommodate all interface design needs for your particular product or company, and yet it's specific enough to be easily applied and used repetitively in a way that speeds up design processes and development processes. Interface designs should really fit into the larger brand and style ecosystem in place for a company. In some cases, the app is the brand. So you might just have a little mobile app that it becomes the company's brand, and that's all you're really designing for. But in most cases, you've got marketing material, branding material, and all of this sort of coexists in a design scenario. So this design system is a way to try to capture all of those nuances about the design that the company needs to deal with in the various components and places that they do. And many times companies have lots of subunits, and they're related products, but they have their own sort of minor ecosystem as well. They're all related. So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. First, I want to talk a little bit about the visual design language. So the design system encompasses this design language and then has additional pieces as well that we'll talk about later. But a visual design language is the core of a design system, and it consists mainly of these categories of color, typography, sizing and spacing, and imagery. And we'll talk about each one of those. For color, let's jump to what color is. Color has the power to invoke an extremely broad range of responses from human beings. Colors elicit physiological responses from viewers, like the calming, blood pressure reducing effect of a blue or a green, or the energizing response to a bright orange or a red. Colors also have psychological effects, and common colors in a design system will include 1 to 3 primary colors that represent a brand oftentimes, but you may end up including a series of tints, related colors, colors mixed with white, or shades that are colors mixed with black. And those will give your designers, if you're building a design system, then the designers have more options. If you're actually creating that color scheme for yourself, adding a few colors helps give you those options. And if you decide those in advance, then that allows you to have to make fewer design decisions later on when you're expanding from an original concept. So let's talk just some basic color theory. The color wheel, something we often all do in elementary school in the United States. We add colors and paints and mix them together to come up with the other colors. For our purposes, I've just recreated a color wheel to illustrate that there are 3 primary colors, and then the primary colors are red, blue, and yellow. And then the secondary colors are orange, purple, and green. When we're dealing with something like printing or painting with paint, we're dealing with color mixing of those physical objects is the way light reflects off of them, and that affects how our eyes perceive them. I'm not going to go into a lot of the technical details about color tonight, but just realize with monitors and digital colors, the colors actually mix differently, and so we have red, green, and blue that become the sources of our colors that then create all these same colors that we see in these palettes. And so when we're talking about primary and secondary colors, we're really talking about the effect that these colors have on the human eye when they perceive them. And so as we talk about that, we'll try not to get too caught up in the technical details of about how these colors are displayed, but just be aware that that is the case. And I'll show you a little bit about how that works as we demonstrate some technologies that we have available to us for colored picking. So the color wheel, when you mix those colors together that are in the primary and secondary colors, you come up with tertiary colors that then are sort of rounding out the color wheel. And obviously we have many, many more colors to choose from in digital platforms because of the way that these digital screens can convey information to our eyes and how we can perceive them. You should be aware when you're dealing with color that not all monitors are the same, not all vibrancy is the same. You can often, as a designer, be designing on for example, a big iMac with a beautiful retina screen, but if you don't think about your users, you forget that they might just be on a little Chromebook or a Windows laptop that's still a 1024 by 768 screen. There's a lot to be said for ensuring that you understand who your user is, where they'll be viewing your designs, so that as you're putting them together, you're not making it impossible for them to see the actual nuance in your design because their technology is not as good as yours. It's just a common problem to be aware of. So when you're thinking about designing a color scheme for your application, I mentioned you're often sticking to brand colors as your primary palette. Then you have secondary colors. One way to choose your color palette for those additional colors is by going monochromatic. What that means is you're choosing one color from your brand, for example, and then choosing multiple tints or shades of that single color in order to create your layout. This is an example of a monochromatic business card layout. It's based on one color with various tones and shades. The monochromatic harmony is always a winning choice, and it's hard to make a mistake in a color choice sense when you're just using a single color. The next choice is analogous. I apologize, I should have changed that label from color wheel to analogous. But an analogous color scheme is one based on a single color and then the two colors on either side of it. Or you may expand beyond those two colors, but within the range of the secondary colors next to it. So in this case, we've got a purple and a red purple and then red. Those are the analogous colors. It might create a very harmonious scheme. You use those colors located right next to each other on the color wheel, and then there's not a lot of contrast, but you can use something like white or black to create additional contrast. These colors just feel like they go well together. All right, I forgot to label this one as well. This one is meant to be complementary, and those are the two colors directly opposite from each other on the color wheel. So in the case of the primary color, this primary color is purple. Is yellow. And then we have its complementary, which is a cross, which is the mix between red and blue. And those colors create the complementary colors are always of strong contrast to each other. And they're very difficult to use in typography with each other, but they can create a nice ambiance and some vibrancy that you don't get from other color combinations. It's basically the opposite of an analogous color screen because you're getting those high contrasts. And lastly, split complementary is taking the two colors on either side of the complement to your primary color. So in this case, we have the light green in between green and blue. And then opposite it is the orange red. And so you take red and orange as the complementary colors. This gets a lot of the similar contrast from the just straight complementary scheme, but it's toned down and muted a little bit more so that you don't have quite the fighting. When you get two complementary colors right next to each other, it often creates a very strong visual effect. If you put a bright purple and a bright yellow next to each other, it's hard to avoid kind of this shakiness to that imagery. So that gives us a broader color palette to use than just a complementary scheme. I said lastly last time, but that wasn't correct. We have the triadic color scheme as well that we want to talk about. And triadic just means three colors, so that's the tri and triadic. Those three colors that are equidistant from each other on the color wheel. So this is something that you can use if you need additional colors for your design, and it adds some balance and vibrancy. And when you use this color scheme, it's often nice to have one color that becomes the dominant color and the others become accents to it. So for example, in each of these little stickers that are showing, we have one dominant color. So the purple is dominant in one, the orange is dominant in another, and then the green is dominant in the last one. And then they have the other colors that act as complements to those colors. So Alan Cooper wrote about phase 3, and I think it's on the 4th edition now, so about phase 4. But he said, color is best used judiciously, and you should limit the number of hues. The carnival effect overwhelms users and limits your ability to communicate. So just like anything we talk about in design, too much of just about anything becomes a detriment to the overall design. Keeping things simpler, limited in content will give you a better design almost every time. So I wanted to show you a tool that Adobe has created. And actually they purchased it, somebody else had made. It used to be called Cooler, now it's called color.adobe.com. And what this is it's a tool for you to explore different color combinations and see how they look, and save those combinations and see what the codes are that you can then put into your design tools, design system. So the way that this works is you have basically a picker of all the available colors on your screen that are available to display. And there are 5 markers within this tool that you can drag around and create a color scheme and see how colors act next to each other. So as you drag, the tool actually helps you by giving some adjustments to the other colors to help make your colors a little bit fit a little bit better within this scheme. So up here on the left, you can see the change color harmony, and those color harmony guides that we just talked about. Monochromatic is available, so you can see it adjusts to where you are in red. You have a bunch of these boxes here demonstrating. You can move it across the color wheel and see how it changes and adjusts. You can mess around with this and find something good that you like. Triadic, as a reminder, the triadic was where we had 3 equidistant points on the color wheel. So you spin this around and kind of see where those equidistant points are so you can choose from those colors. It gives you secondary colors that you can drag in as well to sort of add as a tint or a shade. Complementary, as we said, the complementary was across the color wheel from each other. So your primary colors, you can choose one. And then you can add some additional colors to help flesh that out. And there are other additional ones here that they've listed I haven't talked about. But there's Analagous, keeping with one primary color and then the shades to either side of it. You can adjust that. So that's something to play with as you're going through your design. Just one thing to remember about color is it's easy to get caught up in color, and sometimes going with your own aesthetic decision about color is good, but at other times you need to be a little more thoughtful about what your audience would perceive as good, because there's some cultures that don't match the United States culture on what red means, for example, or what white means. Is white the color of death, or is it the color of marriage? Is it the color of purity? Is red as the same warning meaning here in the United States as it does in Japan, for example? And a lot of times they don't line up. And so you have to be careful about what colors you choose to have what meaning. But color is that powerful part of your interface that really helps give your application an aesthetic appeal and can have the response that you want people to give you as they pick up your application for the first time, or if they use it over and over again. So if you were to choose a bright red color, the first time people might have a really great response to it, like this is deep, or this is exciting. But then if it's something that they have to use every day or for hours at a day, then the red can become really draining on their experience. And so they begin to dread opening your application. That's just a hypothetical, but those are the types of considerations you need to make as you're thinking about color and along with what your users are going to be needing. All right. Oops. Jump back in here. Okay, I'm gonna have to escape out again. We're gonna jump into typography. Typography really deserves its own class. It's something that one of our we have a committee of people who are advising us on the curriculum from industry, and one of them said typography is someplace that their user experience designers really fall short when they're coming in for interviews. Something that she felt was very important. It's not strictly necessary for user experience designers always to have a strong background in typography, but it's something it's worth at least being able to have good conversations about and make good design decisions based on. So I won't go in too much depth in typography, but I want to raise the concern that new designers especially seem to be excited by typography and will often choose some of the fancier the fancier fonts, and that becomes a detriment to their designs overall, because usually typography should scale back and sort of be in the background for an interface design, and it should not be really noticed for its own sake, except by typophiles, people who really focus on typography. You may have seen there was a viral video of I can't remember his name now, Ryan someone, an actor who on Saturday Night Live did this skit about the use of a certain font on Avatar. You will hear from designers they're very good at dissing on fonts like Comic Sans, and really the impulse that a lot of new designers have is that they want to look like their material has been designed, and having a font that's very stylized can sort of give you that sense. What happens is that those fonts have been designed for a specific purpose, and when they were used for that purpose, they fit that purpose. But when we sort of co-opt them to fit into our design, we run into the danger of having it not really fit with the design, and a simpler font would almost always fit better than some of those stylized fonts that you see. So I would say a best practice is read up a little bit on typography, and then just choose a handful of fonts, maybe 3 to 5 fonts that really work well. They're stable, they're solid, and they look good and unassuming, but well designed. And it takes, I think, some time looking through fonts, studying them to understand what the values are. Basically, there's 2 types of fonts. There's serif and sans serif. And choosing 1 or 2 of each of those to have in your toolkit, you can use them in almost any given scenario. If you get beyond that, in any given design, you'd want 1 or 2 fonts. And if you get beyond that, then you begin to build up a lot of complexity in your design system. Adding multiple fonts adds to the technical debt, making loading fonts take longer for your application or site, and also consume more memory at times. So unless you're working for the greeting card industry or maybe the music industry, the place for messing around with fonts is not usually in digital design. There's some really good Google fonts that are available with unrestricted licensing. If you end up designing for mobile web or just the website or just the web, many companies don't want to shell out $500 or $600 for a specific font. Others do, and so they may have their own font that they use. But if you're designing from scratch using an open source Google font, is a great option. There's things like Lotto. Of course, Helvetica is on virtually every computer, and it's really a solid font. And if you don't feel comfortable making a typographic decision, using Helvetica is actually not bad. It's a simple font, but if you then are able to use your design prowess in other areas of the application, then the font fades into the background and you still have a very solid and good design. So sizing and spacing, we talked a lot about this with visual hierarchy as we talked about that. But there's one thing I wanted to mention, which is that you can often choose a scale by which to make your size and spacing design decisions. So as an example, the number 4 based scale has become popular in recent years due to its use in iOS and Android standards. And what that basically means is you use the number 4 to calculate enlargements or distances between objects or sizes of objects. Font sizes, image sizes, distances between objects, the size of each should be a multiple of 4. And if you keep that as a consistent rule within your design system, that adds a lot of solidarity to your design, and it also allows you to avoid having to make additional design decisions each time. If you know that your system allows for multiples of 4 in your font sizing, you can decide that these are the steps within our font system. We will have 16-point font, and then we'll have a 32-point font, and then we'll have a 64-point font. those design decisions become very easy for your design team to then be able to design their product consistently with each other. It also speeds up production work when you have those design system decisions in place. It helps remove some of those ambiguities and allow, again, your focus to be on other more meaty problems in your design. Okay, imagery, taking a stand on imagery style can pay dividends as well, both in terms of decision making during design as well as user perception of the professionalism and the quality of your design. So you want to set guidelines for illustrations and icons and use the best image format for the situation. So I want to jump out here for a second and see if we can show you a couple of things. First, I'm going to go to font, noun project. The noun project is a source of icons. And when you're beginning designing, or even as a professional designer, it's often a really great tool to have something like the noun project available to you. Icons for everything. Basically, these are, in many cases, open source icons, for lack of a better term. So if I wanted to look up a search icon, there are just hundreds of icons that people have made and submitted. And if you choose one you like, you can get it. You can see what kind of license is required. This one's Creative Commons. It says when using it for any project, you're required to give credit to the icon's creator or purchase a royalty-free license. So those are the terms. You can purchase a royalty-free license or make sure that the user gets, or that the creator gets credit. So one thing that designers that are new often do as well is just arbitrarily choose icons that they think look good. But icons are a good way to create consistency in your application and in your system, because when users see icons of different shape or size or line weight, it actually can become quite distracting to them and lend a level of less credibility to you for the lack of aesthetic consistency. So there's some great resources, but just keep that in mind as you look at all of these options. You could get, for an example here, a home icon, but you wouldn't necessarily want to choose a lined home icon and then a solid search icon. They wouldn't match consistently within your system. And internal consistency really adds to that credibility and enjoyability of your site or application. All right, so another source for imagery that you can go to that's I've discovered recently is called Unsplash. Unsplash is a basically free source of imagery. There's no stipulation on how you use them. Obviously, common courtesy is to give credit where credit is due. But this site allows you to find a ton of really great imagery because it's supplied by photographers. It's crowdsourced photography. And with a lot of the imagery that's available through image banks are often of a quality that feels unpleasing to a designer. These images are not falling into that same category, and so tend to be of much nicer quality. Searching through them, it's hit or miss on being able to find what you need, but there's a lot of great quality imagery available on unsplash.com. Another one that I've been shown recently is called Pexel. Free. It also provides a similar type of license for their photos. This one has a lot more of the type of staged photography that I was talking about that Unsplash doesn't have as much of, but this still contains quite a lot of good imagery as well. So these are places you can go to find the type of imagery that you want to use within your application. But as with everything, use your imagery judiciously and avoid overcomplicating your site with a lot of inconsistent imagery. So let me see if I can find a site really quick. I wanted to show a consistency across their imagery. I want to make sure that they are still using the same imagery style. It's coming. Okay. This was a project that I worked on a few years ago for a company called HARMONS. It's a local grocery store chain in Utah. And this as we were going through the site redesign, the designers wanted to ensure that there was a consistency of imagery. So they wanted to set up the first person narrative of the site. And so they made an aesthetic decision to say, okay, we really want this imagery to feel like this is your grocery store, this is your food. That's the theme of this company is your food, our passion. So they're trying to be the high end of grocery chain, and they have a cheese guru who's there to help you choose fancy cheeses, and they have baking classes and cooking classes and wine tasting classes, all these sorts of things at these grocery stores. So they wanted to have all their imagery be consistent. And so that's what you're seeing within this. They've deviated a little bit with the point of view with this middle image, but for the most part, they were trying to really get that first person view of the food, ideally with a person's hand in it to give it that sense of community or personalization. This is your food. So that was just an example I thought of as I was going through this preparation to help give you a sense of why you should take image choice as something that's important. If you're designing websites, it's far more important. You'll have much more likely to have imagery with mobile applications and mobile sites. Having imagery is not as common or as useful as some illustration and iconography. Those are certainly not hard and fast rules, but something to consider as you're choosing imagery for your high fidelity design. So as a recap for that imagery, set guidelines for illustrations and icons, and use the best image format for the situation. A pattern library can speed up production and development work. So when you're creating your design system, then you make a library and you simply collect every UI element that you have in production. If you're creating one from your existing product, then you can create a master file of elements as you create them if you're designing from scratch. You should document each component, what it is and when to use it. From the Envision Comprehensive Guide to Design Systems, they said this step is important. Documentation and standards are what separate a pattern library from a true design system. So I wanted to show you some of these elements of a design system by taking you to the Atlassian Design System website. They have a good example. As a company, they have numerous digital products like Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, and Trello, among others. Each of those products serves a different audience, and some of those were purchases of products from different companies and sort of rolled into the Atlassian product. And so those products have had to sort of take on the Atlassian design. So it's an interesting case study. They've taken a stand on their design language and system. So let's take a look quickly at that. All right, this is at Atlassian.design. They've created a repository for finding all the information that you would want to find out about their design. So as a designer coming new to the product, you'd probably want to go to their brand style guide and learn about some of the rules they've made around what their brand means. So they gave a personality. They want to be bold and optimistic They give words around that: upbeat, resourceful, friendly. And then practical with a wink. We lend a helping hand, tips, tricks, and how-tos are gold. We provide the right information at the right time. So they've gone through and documented what they feel like their brand is. So any design decision should align to this. They have a writing style guide telling you how to write like an Atlassian. They have a color style guide. They said color is a cornerstone of Atlassian design. And they give you a primary palette. Like I mentioned, they've got 3 primary colors. That's fairly typical for a digital design. Then you have secondary palette colors that become an accent color. And they've added some tints and shades to help designers have a little more flexibility with other colors. So there's actually a lot of colors that they have to choose from. And they give you some guidance on how to use color. They give illustration guides explaining how they use illustrations to speak directly to people, to tell the story of where they are and all the places they could possibly go. The logos, they define how logos should be used in what context, and then talk about their typography. I don't have time to go through this whole thing, but I did want to introduce you to that. So they established their design patterns. That's under the brand guidelines, and they have marketing guidelines. Then under product guidelines, that's usually where a digital user experience designer would find that which is most important to them. They have a guideline about using prototypes, and they have a foundation for using accessibility, color choices, a grid that they designed to. We haven't talked about grids in this class, but this is another design tool that you can use to help make your consistency. You can see they're working on a 4-point scale, it looks like. And the iconography, shapes that they use for their icons. This is pretty heavy stuff probably for a new designer, but if it's whetting your appetite, that's a good sign that you're wanting to be in the design field. They have typography guides, the font family for even platform specific. They're using default, looks like they're using default fonts for the iOS and Chrome and Android, and then default fonts for a lot of other platforms as well. And one of the things that design systems also have, they'll give these components, show you what size to use things. They have badges and all of these things very well defined, so you know how to use them and in what context. So I think that's all I'll go into on that. Let me look for one more thing. Yeah, they provided a toolkit. So their development team, the technology team, can actually use components that are pre-coded so that they could just grab a component from this toolkit as well. So that's going beyond just the library in Sketch, for example, and actually providing the whole design system for the whole team and all parts. And this is something that's very complex to keep together and consistent across all the teams, but it provides a stronger foundation for a design system. It allows designers to work very quickly to create products that will be beneficial to their users. All right. So one last thought about high fidelity design here. Perfection is not attained, or is attained not when there is no longer anything to add, but when there is no longer anything to take away. That was written by the author of The Little Prince, and I don't know how to pronounce his name in French. but in the American, I say Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. This is a key message, I think, in design, is that the more you put into a design, the more complex it becomes, the more unwieldy and difficult to use. And that's kind of why the interface design community has steered away from Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator. Those products have become so complex that they're just unwieldy and there's too much to do. There's still great programs for what they do, especially in photography. And sometimes you can use them for Photoshop for photography, Illustrator, great vector design program. But for doing a quick user interface, going to Sketch or Figma or Adobe XD, these are much easier tools to use. And it's because they haven't got the bloat yet that often comes with long-term existing applications. What Alan Cooper said in About Phase 3, he said, every visual element and every difference in color, size, or other visual property should be there for a reason. If you can't articulate a good reason why it's there, get rid of it. Designers often will experiment by taking out pieces of their design and say, does this design still hold up? Does it do what we need it to do? Is it still strong for our users' needs and getting the jobs done? If it still stands up, you leave it out. If it's weakened by the omission, you put it back in. It's a good way to test your designs, take out elements as needed. All right. So I just want to put this plug in. If you've enjoyed this class, if you would like to learn more, then we will be starting the full-time course this October. And so just give it some thought if you'd like to. I'll post a link in the chat for how you could apply. And then I'll post it in Slack as well. So let's talk a little bit about the assignment now. Let's see where I put the assignment document. Disappeared. Okay, I'm gonna have to open it fresh, I guess. All right, here we are. Assignments day 8. Create a high fidelity design and sketch based on the wireframes you created. Incorporate any insights you gained in your usability interview and create a high fidelity mockup of your screens using Sketch. Upload your screens to Envision and update any click-through functionality you need to make it current with the revised designs, and create a portfolio page for your work. So let's talk a little bit about that in the last few minutes we have. And feel free to post any questions that you have in chat if you like. I'll try to watch for those. But the idea is we want to give you some practice applying color and your spacing, getting it more accurate to a specific spacing or I guess scale, like we talked about, number 4 scale, for example. Getting imagery in there if your design calls for imagery, choosing icons, something from like the Noun project, and just putting all those pieces together, making it consistent, getting some copy in there, thinking about that high fidelity design process. So that last thing, creating a portfolio page for your work. This is something that I would ask you to send to me if you are interested in applying to the full-time course, because I want to see sort of your thinking, what you've learned through the process. So I want you to make sure that you don't completely erase your wireframes as you're making your updates, so that you can have screenshots of those that you could add to your portfolio document. Basically, the portfolio page for your work from this class, what I'd like to see is screenshots or camera images of your sketches, and talk about your brainstorming activity, what the idea was, where you came to, talk about the interview, talk about what you did to find out more about that during the discovery phase. So you'd basically follow the cycle that we went through. The discovery phase, what did you learn from your interviews? What were you seeking? What were the ideas that came from that as you brainstormed? What were the wireframes looking like as you sort of put borders around that idea that you had? What were the insights that you gained from doing user research, user testing through those usability tests? And then come up with a high fidelity design and show sort of what the changes were, what design decisions you made at the high fidelity level that you hadn't already made at the information hierarchy level, and that. So that portfolio could be in a sketch document or a Google document or Word document. I don't really care, because really what I'm wanting to see is basically text along with the images from those experiences and what state they were at. Ideally, you'll use some of your layout skills and your design skills that you've learned through this class to make that portfolio document appealing aesthetically and clear for me to go through what's good on visual hierarchy, what's important for me to look at first, and how should I go through that page. Use those skills to create that portfolio. That's not something you have to turn into me tonight, but if you are going to apply, I'd love to see that, while this information is fresh in your mind, so I can give you feedback if I'd like to see it in a different format or something changed or better. So this is the wrap up of our course. I'd like you to do those high fidelity designs at least tonight over the next hour, as much as you can get done, and then get back together with your groups again, discuss what you've done, get any feedback that might help you improve the high fidelity design. And we've got a few more minutes. Would there be anything helpful for me to show you within Sketch, or that you would like to have me answer? Post any thoughts in the chat or in Slack, and I can try to answer anything. Okay, B is asked if I can briefly go over uploading a sketch document to Envision. Okay, let's review that really quickly. See if I have some Sketch open. Let's see if I can open our document from the other night. Example wireframe. Okay, the easiest way, if you've downloaded the Craft plugin to do this, is the Craft plugin will be here. You select any screen that you need to update to Envision, and I do that by clicking on the
You're
name.
not sure. You're not sharing your screen.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Forgot I turned off my share. All right. So here we are again. We're in Sketch. We've created these wireframes. You can just go to this button here with Craft, and you select your prototype. Once you're logged in, it should show you. Wireframe project is the one I was using, so I update those, and it goes directly to InVision. Now, if you haven't downloaded Crafter, for some reason that doesn't seem easy to you, and you want to do things the hard way, you can also select your artboard and make exportable. You can export a screen, and it will export at whatever size and type you specify. There's lots of different types. I usually go with PNG. JPEGs tend to be a little bit smaller than PNG files, but I haven't had any trouble with dealing with PNGs. So if you do that, then you can go to InVision. I'll pull this up there. So when you're in your project in InVision, you can actually drag over files. So here I have my PNG file that just downloaded. I drag it over here, and the outline of the screen turns green, so it knows that it's detecting it. I pull it in, and it just automatically updates that screen onto the page as well. And if you make an update to like the high fidelity here, if I wanted to throw in an image, see if I have some. I have an image here that I've thrown in. The same image will overwrite that other one in my wireframe project. And it should happen fairly quickly. I can find whatever screen I was on. There it is. Should be updated. Well, that seems a little buggy tonight. Oh, there we go. Maybe it's just a slow session. I haven't had that trouble before, but anyway, hopefully that was helpful, B. Let me go back to the chat and see. For Sketch, can you make your own component of grouped pieces and use it in multiple places? So if you want to update a piece of it later, say a fancy search box. Yes, Janine, that is what you can do is, for example, I've got this box here, and I want to make it reusable so that those are called symbols. So let's do this one. I'll create a symbol, and I'll call this a text box with label. So now I could use this. You can see that the icon changed a little bit there with that arrow thing. That means it's a symbol. And I can duplicate it. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Duplicating it here. So now I have two instances of this symbol, and you can tell it's a symbol because there's the arrows there. So if I double click that, it will open the symbols page that it's just created. Now that I have this symbol, and I can change this to be name of user. And return to instance. And now both of these say name of user. So that those symbols are very, very useful. And you can nest symbols within each other. And every time you create a symbol like that and make an instance of it, then you have an override panel on the right-hand side. So instead of name of user, I might want it to be password and this one. So the symbol stays the same, but the override allows you to create unique instances of that. And that way, if you had to change the style of your text box, and we say, okay, for our text boxes, we now want the border to be purple. Return to instance, and now all the borders are purple. So there's a lot of flexibility that comes into that. And Janine, was that what you were asking about? All right, cool. From Kermit, I don't have assignment specific questions, but broadly, how important is consistency when designing a product? How does one get better at design? Assuming just by doing it, but you never know. Yes. This is one thing that when I was talking with the hiring partners and the advisory council, it's really hard to teach aesthetics specifically. It's hard to help people recognize quality design over kind of the newbie state, I guess you could say. But one way that you can get better is actually to go through and try to replicate some other design that somebody else has created. You say, how did they do that? So you take your blank sketch canvas, you grab a screenshot of somebody else's website or their mobile application, and you just start dragging rectangles over it. And as you do that, you try to look for the tools that allow you to get the drop shadow just so. And then you kind of see what they did in order to do that. Sometimes you hit something like, I don't know how on earth they did that. You might Google it. You might try to experiment. And just doing that type of thing with multiple sites will really give you a lot of insight into kind of the designer's mindset, what they're doing, what they're thinking. So that's one really good way to get much better, both at using a design tool like Sketch or Figma, but also at thinking like a designer, making design decisions. And you won't always agree with what other designers do, but being able to kind of get into their shoes, it's a good habit to get into. As far as your question about consistency is important to the extent that you're allowing your designers to not have to make too many design decisions that are menial. And it's important in that users really respond to consistency very well, and it lends a sense of both trust and credibility and positive aesthetic vibe from that. So aside from those things, you can always make a decision to be inconsistent. There are places where it might not make sense to have the same page type layout for certain types of information than others. So you don't have to be a slave to consistency, but it should be your default thought process to say, okay, let's just do this the way we've done everything. And if we, through our user research, through our user testing, through our ideation, we come up with something that says, hey, if we deviate here, it'll actually be faster for users to do this, or it will make more sense to them in this context. Always feel free to deviate, but just don't deviate haphazardly or on a whim. Give it good designerly thought and run it through at least a mini cycle of the product development cycle, and you'll be off much better. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions for now. Thanks so much, everybody. This has been an awesome experience for me. I hope it has been for you. Good luck on your projects, and definitely hit me up if you want to ask me a question or send over your homework. And we'll look forward to hearing from you again. Thanks, everybody, and have a great evening and a great rest of your life if I don't see you again.